of what I did this morning. Apologies if you've heard this before, but just for those of you who were elsewhere this morning, I'm just going to run through bits and bobs. The first is who we are, Julie's Bicycle. Our vision is creativity, culture and creativity, powering climate action. I think we're getting closer and closer to seeing that happen all over the world, so it's very exciting. We've been engaged on this wonderful journey as a team for about 12, 13 years, and it's wonderful seeing it grow. And actually, we thank you for the objectives, Leah. We actually have net zero carbon and restoration of nature, that arts and culture. How does it do that? Inspiring public action for sure. And finally, the last objective that we're really focusing on at the moment is how we champion climate justice. That's justice for people, but it is also for the natural world around us. And the topic is obviously about funding and money. I'm going to challenge some of that in a bit, but the first thing that I was asked to talk about was the Arts Council programme. So I'm going to romp through that. So this has been very, very, really critical, I think, for the whole movement as well as for the arts community. In 2012, our national funding body, the Arts Council of England, made reporting on environmental impacts, having an active policy and a plan, a funding requirement for 800 plus of their major portfolio, from organisations up and down the country, big, small, buildings, festivals, studios, artists, community. And it really has been a game changer. All people were asked to do was to measure their impacts. And we're about to produce the latest report from last year, which was pre-COVID. But the results have been really, really exciting. We have accompanied this programme with, first of all, providing tools, carbon measurement tools, which have been developed by the cultural sector as well as us, and lots of events, lots of activities, lots of briefings, lots of advice, lots and lots and lots of support and inspirational events and networks. And the result has been, here's some of the results. We've had some terrific performance results: energy efficiency and carbon reductions, 35% decrease in energy use, a 23% decrease in energy use between 2012 and 13, and 7% average annual reduction year on year. And these, we haven't asked people to reduce anything. They've just, by learning about the issue, they've actually taken the responsibility on. We've saved at least 20 million. These are dates. These are figures from the previous report. That's about 25 million euros that has just been saved through good housekeeping. None of that has been required savings, and we've been able to prove that. So the data is really clear that actually you don't need to spend money on environmental measures. It actually saves you, and 75% have found organizations found their environmental policy really useful, supporting funding applications, and they have been able to get further funding on the basis of showing their commitment to sustainability. Lots of organizations are taking action. So 64% are eliminating single-use plastic altogether. 54% have invested in energy efficiency measures, looking for the slightly longer term for their business bottom lines. And 49%, this has gone up again. Half the portfolio are commissioning new work specifically on climate, and more funders in the UK, philanthropic funders, trusts and foundations are putting funding programs available that are working to this theme. So again, in terms of fundraising, it has been really, really helpful. A lot of funding policy now in the UK is following the Arts Council's policy. Lots of cultural funding is now doing this. And all of this is showing that I think we have a new a new creative ecology, an ecology rather than an economy, where organizations are coming together, collaborating and doing things very differently. There are efficiencies at every stage of this ecology. But what's increasingly happening is that people are realizing that actually they need to rethink their business models and get much, much more ambitious, because the scale of this problem is absolutely huge. And we need to start thinking about our metrics, what it is that we're really looking at. There are some organizations, and I know Jerry's on this. Jerry, we take great inspiration from your work. There's a group of organizations that, like Jerry's work, are looking at pathways to a net zero future, and using all of the parts of their activities, all of the bits of their portfolios to understand what needs to be done. Really thorough work. It's very pioneering work, and it's work that actually we will all need to be doing very quickly if we're going to meet the challenges in front of us. So this is a really exciting leadership program. And I've just got two very interesting examples. We've been working closely with our Tate, which is an iconic international a series of galleries. We did a very detailed carbon footprint with them recently. We found that 92% of their impacts are from visitor travel. So they will make lots of efficiencies, but there are some really difficult bits of the system that we need to work on. And the National Theatre, which has also put themselves into the public profile, like the Tate, they've declared a climate emergency, and they're just gradually going through all the bits that need to be done and saving money and building reputation in the process. But here is the challenge to you. We need to ask ourselves, what is the business model for this new world? And there are lots of new ideas, new language, new framing that's coming up. Just a few: B Corp, circular economy, natural capital, the sharing economy. What's the triple bottom line? A rethinking of what it is that we value. Community ownership, ecosystem services, all sorts of new ways of looking at value. Because how we tackle this really does depend on that word, value. I think that we need to start thinking about how we are framing climate, because it's not, and neither should it, make us rich and wealthy. Within that, there is something already profoundly unethical, and here is the challenge. We've been working on the basis of making some assumptions that, and this is specifically around culture, of nature as a machine, nature is hostile, nature is to be conquered, rather than nature as a giving parent, a web of life, a teacher upon which we depend prodigiously. Similarly with culture, we view culture too often as an engine of economic growth, particularly in the context of our cities, that culture is the pinnacle of the human achievement, and it transcends, it is better than, it is a better version of nature. Instead of taking a bit of humility, understanding that culture really does need to be regenerative, it's nourishing, it is an ecosystem in and of itself. And these old metaphors that we're working to that are so profound really do need to be challenged. If we don't challenge it, culture will be left behind, and we will experience some of the worst effects of climate breakdown, because culture is so profound to who and how we navigate the world and who we bring with us. Culture, it speaks to our deepest selves as well as to the communities around which we congregate. So culture is an absolutely critical part of how we navigate the world. We could alternatively have a flourishing earth where culture is connected to communities and regenerating our living planet. But there is no question that the current business model for culture, based on numbers of people, large numbers of people, many traveling from all over the world, as you see with the Tate footprint, and buying and consuming material goods is not going to get us anywhere. In a short, we're trying to solve 19th century problems, i.e. industrialization based on fossil fuels and mass consumption, with 20th century solutions, which are largely about capitalism out of control, for 21st century issues. And those issues are about how we regenerate, how we reduce, how we create equity, how we create fairness and justice for a global community of people and of the living things, the ecosystems upon which we depend. So, just a quick quote by Buckminster Fuller: "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." And our new models, the frameworks for our new models are really clear. It's decarbonisation at all costs, at speed and at scale, as rapidly as we can. We need to wean ourselves rapidly off fossil fuels. Nature, regenerate, rejuvenate, conserve, steward in a completely different way. Much of nature is not valued in our current economic model. So we need to think about how we can value nature, both economically, but also how we can widen how we express value. There's no more waste. We need to really, if we've got areas to innovate in, we need to innovate around getting rid of waste. No more waste. We need to move to a circular economy. And of course, underneath it all, as I've expressed, justice for all. This is very important because it requires us to look at our responsibilities, reparation and fairness for those that are suffering disproportionately around the climate crisis. And these are hugely challenging. They require us to upend both what we value and how we pay for that. And for us in the industrialized West, it requires us to really think about what is enough. So just very briefly, and I'm going to whiz through the rest of the slides, so there's lots of opportunity. We've seen examples of new ways of valuing things all over the world. We're in the middle of an epoch, and I think the COVID moment has shown us all that actually business as usual not only doesn't work because it's all about extracting nature to an extent where it is deeply, deeply corrosive to all of us, but also that there is a moment here where we've got some real choices to make. And of course, in Europe, you have a framework for the Green Deal. This is happening everywhere. And we're seeing a new creative economy taking place all over the world, which is reframing from an economy to an ecology. And this, I'm not going to, you can download all of these. I've got examples and case studies of all of this on these. And these are 7 key areas in which the principles of value are being widening, and people are looking at how to work together very differently. These are all examples, and you're welcome to them. I'm not going to spend too long on them. So the real challenge here, I think, is about how we might work differently. I'm not going to pretend that, because it would be very disingenuous, that we can return post-pandemic to where we were. And I think we all need to really understand that. I'm sure you all do. And I think at the heart of all of this, in all this time that I've spent doing this, I think the biggest, most important principle for me is how to work together, how to think differently in the context of climate and the environment, and how important it is and how challenging and difficult it is to collaborate instead of competing. And I think this is our biggest philosophical challenge, because it's very counterintuitive to the existing system, and it also requires us to really understand where our values organizationally, artistically, creatively sit, and what are our tolerance levels around losing or reducing some areas, and only you can answer that. But I think it's a really, really important question. And I'm going to leave you with that for conversation. Thank you.
So thank you, Alison. Wow, this was an energetic and powerful presentation, and I have the feeling that I could start a full whole discussion on the afternoon on every slide you show us. But I try to limit down also what I want to ask. So far, I didn't notice any question in the chat or in the Q&A box. So for everyone following us, please feel free to have a question, to share a question, and I will make sure that we can discuss it here. But as there is no question at the moment, I think I have the chance to start with my question. So you presented a lot of figures, and you said, I think it was right in the beginning, you mentioned these 20 million savings, 20 million. And I wanted to ask, I'm not sure if I got right to what these 20 million were related, but maybe you can give us an idea how this money was saved. So where was it not spent for?
Yeah, so there's a really simple equation here that seems to work really well. That when people are given the opportunity to really develop climate literacy, understanding that the energy, the money that they're spending on resources, whether it be energy or water or waste, and they start to understand how that might translate into impact areas, which are both in terms of carbon and in terms of finance, you find that it does the work that you need. It's already done for you. So people will, once they have that information, they start to make the kinds of decisions that are really positive around doing things better. So that really amazing sum of money that has been saved is simply saved on efficiencies. And the reason that we know that is because we've got a set of carbon calculators that all these organizations are required to fill in annually. And so they give us their financial information, which we anonymize and aggregate and pull it all together. And through that, you can pull out these key data sets, which is, as you can see all me in shadow. I'll just move over a bit, which has been so useful to us. So really, that's about understanding data and evidence, becoming more literate and managing things in a different way. And I do think that we need to have carbon emissions on the balance sheet in just the same way as we have finance. They need to speak very, very closely to one another. So that's how we can prove that. And we're very, very, very confident around that data because we have the proof for it.
Okay, thank you. So while you were speaking, I saw that there is a question in the chat. I was not able to read and listen at the same time. Sorry. So I have a look at the chat. So it's from Sarah Salven. She asked, what do you think about, are such approaches of sustainability for artistic institutions something to better be built bottom up, or should be introduced by cultural policy? For example, as mandatory strategy to needed to get funding. So I think the question is, how do you change the mindset?
Yeah. Such a great question. Thank you, Sarah. So I think there's no single way, but just our experience is that policy really needs to be led by the people to whom it relates. So there's an incredibly important principle that if you want cultural policy, particularly in the context of climate, to work, it needs to speak very directly to those people who are going to have to enact it. And when our Arts Council adopted this policy, we were able to work very closely with them to ensure that we had the data, we had a lot of support from the cultural community who'd been working with us already. We knew what was not going to work. We knew what the problems are going to be in advance, because we'd been running for 5 years before the Arts Council made this policy. So we were pretty confident that it would work. So we were able to take that and build, help the Arts Council to build the policy framework around that, and to help them design a programme. Not just Julie's Bicycle. There were lots of inputs into this. And that has been incredibly helpful, because it means that when policy does come in, people are ready for it and it will work. And at that point, the importance of the top down in really sort of moving people on, moving the sector on, cannot be underestimated. So really, it's such a great question, Sarah. The policy that Arts Council require organisations to do is matched in organisations themselves. So you've got this big policy framework that matches the small policy framework that comes from the ground up. And once you get rolling on that, it just continues to enrich. So I think it's a very good question. I think start with what you know, and in order that policy really works. But I do think that, I mean, we're seeing more and more funding opportunities pegged to climate action.
Okay, thank you. I think I have a question, or maybe something to add, which really connects to what also Sarah was asking, because I really like the chart you showed us, where we had culture on the one side, or culture I think on the bottom, and nature on the top, and you showed this contradiction between culture as an engine of economic growth, as it is understood in many policy makers areas, however. But then where you want us to shift to, or that's how I got it, is to think as culture is something regenerative. And at that moment I thought, wow, but how do you make these policy makers believe in that? Because me coming from an EU background, knowing that economic growth is always the one and best argument for everything, I imagine that this is really like a tough discussion to have with policymakers.
So it is a tough discussion. It is, but I think things have changed so rapidly. First of all, since COVID, but also because the climate crisis is emerging, and the nature crisis is emerging, and we can't lose them. And I think that increasingly what we're seeing is that the idea that economic gross domestic product, or is the kind of key metric, is being increasingly not just questioned, but being recognized as nonsense. We do not live by money alone. But underneath all of that, there are some really, really difficult questions about how we move from where we are now with this single metric of value to one that actually restores. And we have, we've not always been like this, and there are many communities that still are not like this, where we restore a wider representation of what matters to us. We're seeing it in all of these new economic frames that I showed the slide for, but we're also seeing it, I think, in this move away from the sort of big monolithic to the more local. Obviously, the challenges are increasing all the time. There's the climate challenge. There's also a crisis in democracy, and that's around these great big technology giants. And how we actually navigate our ways around that. But I do think that we have to start somewhere. We have to lead where truth lies for ourselves. And if we're really honest, we know that getting rich quick is not going to be possible for everyone. And it doesn't always make us happy. So what is a commensurate, what is enough? I think that's such an important question that we need to ask. What is enough, and what are those wider values that we need to start promoting? And I think policymakers are led by us, and this goes back to Sarah's question. Policymakers need to help us to thrive. So if we're articulating ourselves in a more creative, more imaginative way, I think we have an enormous amount to give. And one other final thing, which is that we will only tackle climate and our ecological emergency if we reach out to citizens in a different way. And the fact that we're in this situation, I think, is largely because culture, and I really do think this, culture has not been part of this conversation. And it's an incredibly exciting, creative challenge for us to move into this space and to help to frame culture and nature and our civic engagement really differently to support our policymakers make those difficult decisions that will bring about a safe and regenerative world, which is in all our interests.
Okay, yeah. I hope I will remember some of your words for my next discussion in this field. But let me come to maybe one last question, if you're okay. I think we are almost at the end, but there's still a question from Ralph. He asks, Alison, what are your experiences on sustainability partnerships and cooperations between cultural institutions and business corporations?
Great question. Probably not a huge amount of time to answer it, but I think they can be terrific. But and we work with hundreds of businesses, but cultural businesses. But we're also, we're often involved in other businesses as well. I think partnership's very hard, and I think I recognise that underneath that question. The key thing I think is to keep an ethical compass. So as long as it's really clear around what the values are and the joint purpose and doing things that you both do differently, but recognize and respect the contributions, they can be terrific. So we need everybody. And I think one of the problems that we've got, this whole thing about collaborate, don't compete, is that we have to bring a mindset that involves us all in really healthy, positive and trusting partnerships.
Okay, thank you. I already promised that this was the last question, but I have a very short last question, and I hope that everyone will profit from it. So we had 20 people here, and what would you advise for us willing to reduce also our carbon footprint, not only our own, but in our organizations? What's the area or maybe the department we should look at
just
in the first moment?
Go for a walk in this beautiful planet of ours. Go and enjoy it. Smell it. Go for a walk, but also think about justice. Justice is unless we deal with justice, we will not succeed.
Okay, thank you very much. And
Thank
I guess
you very much.
Taking a walk, having a walk is the best thing we can do right now.
Yeah.
Difficult times. So thank you, Alison. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. And if you want to stay with us, okay, so the next presentation is in German, but for the audience, you can join us in about 15 minutes for a presentation on funding programs on how to reduce carbon footprints by renovating old buildings. So
great.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.